Hey, what's up? Richard here from Blender Grid, and in this video, I want to walk you through a lot of compositing that I had to do to get to this image. So you might think, what's special about this image here, this Suzanne render? Well, let me show you. I wanted to make this image integrate with the website really well. So in order to do that, I wanted to have a transparent background, but also use this shadow and indirect lighting that you can see here on this virtual ground, if you will. So let's change the color of the background and see how well it integrates. Check that out. It just looks like it just works. And if you look close to this shadow area, you can see it's a little bit blue because Suzanne is blue and it's reflecting the light. It's casting that blue light onto the ground. And yeah, it's pretty cool. And the shadow is really accurate. And I had to overcome a lot of problems and challenges that I solved with compositing. So I want to just show you how to do that. So let's jump into Blender. I'm not going to start this and build this whole thing from scratch. I'm just going to show you the end result. And I will also give you this blend file for available. I will make this blend file available for download if you want to play with it. So let's take a look. This is a very simple 3D scene. So this is not the most interesting thing. But the way I organized this is I used 3 different collections, one for Suzanne, one for the plane, the ground plane, and one for the rest of the lights and the camera. So with these 3 collections, you can also make a couple of different view layers. So the first view layer is called Monkey. And with that one, I just wanted to see Suzanne, but I also want to have the influence of the ground going on. So that's the first little trick. We do that with an indirect only little thing here. Like this little icon is checked. So if you don't see this icon, you might have to enable it with this here. If you hit this filter, and then you can check this, and it will not render the ground, but it will influence the ground. Will influence all the other objects. So in this case, Suzanne. If we take a look at that, it looks like this. So it's a little bit dark here because of this ground influence. All right. The next one is just the ground clean and then the ground influenced. The ground clean is simple. I just disable the whole objects collection. So there's no Suzanne. With the ground influenced, it's pretty much the ground and how it's influenced by Suzanne. So now on the Suzanne collection, we have that little icon enabled. So we don't see Suzanne, but we only see the shadow and the indirect light. So that's what's going on. If we look at what that looks like, we have the ground clean, just a clean plate of the ground. I want to use that in the compositor. And then we have this. All right, cool. So that is how so that's the little introduction to what we need for the compositing. Now, in the compositor, we do all of this stuff. And all right, first of all, we import all our render layers. We have Suzanne, we have the ground clean, and we have the ground influenced by Suzanne. All right, so one of the easiest way to composite Suzanne onto the ground, if that's what you want to do, you can just use this image. This image. Let's zoom in a little bit. Use this image and lay Suzanne on top of it using an alpha overnode, and then you get this. So this is what the normal render would look like. And maybe we have to... All right. This is what the normal render would look like. What I want to get to is a perfectly clean background, and then put Suzanne on top of it. So the way we get to a perfectly clean background, like completely white, except for the shadow area, is we take this image and we combine it with the ground clean in a way that makes everything white except for the shadow. So the way I do that is I take this and I divide it with a color mix node. I divide it with this image, and then you get this. And this looks almost the same, but the whole ground is completely white, except for this area. And then the only little issue is this background, and we can just remove that with a mix node. I'm pretty much mixing in this image with a white, just white, based on the alpha channel. And then you get this. And I use this erode to get rid of a little line. So if we disable this erode and I zoom in here, you see this nasty line going on. And this is a little bit of a hacky way to solve it, but it works. So when we enable this erode, it's perfectly clean. And this is what we want to use. And this is a very easy way to get a very clean render. So if we put this into the alpha overnode over here, then we get this. And then we have Suzanne on a perfectly clean white background, but it still has the shadow. And that's already pretty cool, but that's just the beginning, because what we want is to make this background transparent instead of white. And we don't want to lose the shadow. So the first step I wanted to do is come up with the alpha channel. And the alpha channel of Suzanne is easy. That's just this. That's this. So we already have that. But the alpha channel of the shadow is something we don't have yet. So I started with this. And pretty much what we want is we want to make everything transparent. Everything that's white, we want to be transparent, except for the darker areas. So the way you can do this, let me zoom in here so you can see it, is just to invert this image and then convert it to black and white. And that's all you need to do. And then you have a pretty good alpha channel for the shadow. And the only problem here is that it exceeds our boundaries of the image. So we would have to increase the size of the image. That would be one solution. The other solution is to just narrow down that area a little bit. And I decided for that to narrow it down. So first step is I used a power node. And what a power node does is if you have a value bigger than 1, you make everything that's below, everything that's gray will be darker. Everything that's white stays the same. So that's it. In a way, it increases the contrast of the image. So that's one step. And the second step is I just decided to use a mask and blur it. And then I multiply this with this, and then you get this. And that's how I got the alpha channel. So that's pretty easy, pretty straightforward. So now we have an alpha channel, and we have what we want it to look like. So what if we just use that alpha channel and use it with this image? That might be like the first intuition you have. But the reason that doesn't work is the alpha channel is say this area is, maybe the alpha channel is somewhere between 0 and 1. So it will, if you use that alpha channel with this pixel value and you mix it with a white background, it will mix this color in with white. So it will make your whole shadow too pretty much too light, and it will wash out the whole shadow pretty much. So that was the exact challenge that I wanted to solve here. And all right, so what I did was I came up with some equations to calculate the exact pixel values, and I will go deeper into this in the article about this, about the Suzanne image. That if you don't watch this video on the website, then you can probably click the link below this video and get to the article. But I used mathematics to come up with equations for the pixel values, and then I translated it into the notes. I'm just going to show you the notes here. I'm not going to go into the mathematics. I will do so in the article, but that will make this video way too long. So, all right, let's look at the equation. The final equation was translated into these three nodes: a subtract, add, and divide. And as you can see, we're having a gamma node right here that's disabled. And that's another issue that I'll talk about later. So let's keep them disabled. So we take this image, the clean white background, and in some way we have to combine that with the alpha channel. So first I subtract this image. I subtract white from it, so it becomes kind of very like negative values. As you can see here, the color values are negative, but then I add the alpha channel to it. And finally, I divide by the alpha channel, and then you get this crazy result. But in this case, I would not trust my eyes. I wouldn't trust what I see here. I would just trust what I calculated. And there is a way to test if this works. So these are the final. It looks really weird, but if you think about it, this looks way too saturated. It looks way too blue. But if you mix a semi-transparent color with white, you will wash it out and you will reduce the saturation. So that's a little bit promising. So we take this image and then we use the alpha channel and we set the alpha on it. There you get this. Then we convert straight to pre-multiplied. What that does is it multiplies the color values with the alpha channel one time to make certain parts a little bit darker. And that's, in this case, it's needed to do that in order to get a proper mix going on. And now we have the shadow area. It still looks way too bright, too blue, but now we have the shadow area and it nicely fades out into transparency. So that's pretty cool. The next step is we use an alpha overnode to add Suzanne on top of that. So if we trace that back, it just goes to Suzanne. So we lay Suzanne on top of this, and then we get this. And this is pretty much the final image that I used for the website. But it still looks way too blue. And now I can talk about the gamma nodes. The first time I did this, I was wondering if my equation was wrong, because it didn't look accurate. But then when I tested it in the compositor, it was accurate. So let's test that. So let's see what happens when we take this image and we put it on top of a white background. And we can do that with another alpha overnode, and I already set that up here. And we have these gamma nodes that I'm going to ignore. So this looks wrong, but if we put this on top of a white background, we get this. And that looks pretty accurate. And if we compare this with just using this background and laying Suzanne on top of that, we get this. So this is, let me zoom in here. We have this alpha overnode. We just plug in Suzanne and our clean background. And that's a very easy way. That was one of the first things I went over. So then we get this. And if we compare that with our final result, it is pretty much exactly the same. So the math works. But we get, we're laying this image on top of a white background. Then we get this. Right now, we're doing it in the Blender Compositor. And the thing about the Blender Compositor is that it works in linear color space. However, the browser doesn't do that. When we export this as a PNG with a transparent background, the PNG will be saved in sRGB color space. And the browser will apply all the effects also in sRGB color space. The effect of laying an alpha channel image on top of a background. Compositing, pretty much. It's sort of compositing what the browser is doing. But that happens in sRGB. So what I wanted to do, or what I needed to do, is convert. Let's zoom into the compositor. We have to convert from linear to sRGB and then do our math. Then we have to come back out of it and save our image. So that's the final issue that I had. And when we do that, it works. So first, we use a gamma node with a value of 0.45. And this is approximately the same as moving from a linear, or transforming from linear to sRGB color space. Value of 0.45. Then after we do all that and we set the alpha, we convert the alpha, then we come back out of sRGB, because the Blender Compositor needs to say the final composite node expects an image in linear space, and then it saves it as sRGB depending on your export settings. If you export it as a PNG, it will use sRGB. So quite complicated, but the way to go from sRGB back to linear is using a gamma of 2.2. And then when we look at this, you can see it's a lot less saturated. So that's already promising. And then when you use an alpha over to add Suzanne to this, this is now our final image. And this is actually what we're going to save as a PNG. As you can see, we plug this into the compositor, into the composite node. And the export settings are PNG. So I already know that this works, but we can test if this works by using, again, our little alpha over test. So when we lay this on top of a white background, now we have this, and this is not correct. This does not look like our result, and that is because now we're using this sRGB calculated image, but we're doing the alpha over in linear color space because we're doing it in the Blender Compositor. So here I did the same thing pretty much. I went from linear back to sRGB. So I'm kind of simulating how the browser is doing the compositing, and then I do the compositing. So I just lay it on top of a white background. Then I come back out of sRGB. And now you almost didn't see the difference, right? If we compare this alpha over node, the one that's just using the clean background with Suzanne, and we compare that with, oh my God, this zooming is, all right. If we compare that with the final test, it's pretty much the same. All right, and that's it. So now the result that we plug into the composite node here will export a PNG file, and if you put that on your website, it looks like this. And that's the whole walkthrough of this thing. It took like 20 minutes to do this, to not even to build this, but to walk you through this. If you're still watching this, that's pretty impressive. But I will share this blend file with you so you can replace Suzanne with any image that you like. And yeah, that's it. I hope this was helpful, and happy blending.